Pain was never the test. Control was. Long before psychology named dissociation, before modern men learned to avoid discomfort, young Lakota men stepped into a ritual where pain was used as a teacher, not to break them, but to prove something terrifying, that the mind does not have to obey the body. This ceremony scared colonizers, enraged missionaries, and still makes modern psychologists uncomfortable, because it revealed a truth we've spent centuries trying to forget. This is one of those truths. And this is ancient paths of men. Pain control did not begin inside the ritual. It began long before that, in the world these boys were raised in. The world of the Lakota Sioux was not designed to protect comfort or explain hardship. It was open land, harsh seasons, long distances, and real consequences. Cold did not care how young you were. Hunger did not wait for readiness. Danger did not announce itself in advance. From an early age, Lakota boys learned a lesson modern life rarely teaches clearly. Your body will complain, but the world will not adjust. Survival required adaptation, not excuses. Endurance was not treated as a special trait or something heroic. It was the baseline expectation of belonging. In that environment, manhood was never announced or granted. There was no moment where someone officially told a boy that he had arrived. No age threshold.
No symbolic certificate.
Instead, manhood emerged through action, especially under pressure. The real question was never who you claimed to be, but who you became when stress entered the body, when fear tightened the chest, when discomfort demanded attention. Strength was not about aggression or dominance, but about control. The tribe watched closely, not with cruelty, but with expectation. A boy who could remain steady under strain earned trust without words. A boy who broke learned something just as important about where work was still needed. This is where modern interpretations often fail, because pain itself was never treated as the enemy. Pain was not a moral punishment or a sign of weakness. It was information. It revealed where the mind believed the limits were, not where the limits actually ended. Avoiding pain meant avoiding growth, and fear of discomfort was seen as more dangerous than injury itself. That belief changes everything. Instead of reacting to pain with panic, Lakota men were trained to observe it, to breathe through it, to remain present inside it. Pain became something you entered deliberately, not something you fled from automatically. By the time the sun dance arrived, the groundwork had already been laid. The ceremony did not suddenly teach pain tolerance from nothing. It exposed whether the internal discipline had been built correctly. It revealed who could remain steady when instinct screamed to escape. And it made something unmistakably clear to everyone watching. Pain does not control a man unless he has never been taught how to meet it. That is why the ritual mattered. And that is why what comes next pushed so far beyond what the modern mind is comfortable witnessing. The moment the sun dance approached, everything changed, not because fear appeared, but because intention sharpened. Participation was never forced. That was the first rule outsiders failed to understand. A young man chose to enter knowing exactly what was coming. That choice mattered more than the pain itself. By stepping forward willingly, he claimed ownership over what would happen to his body. This wasn't punishment. It was consent transformed into commitment. In the world of the Lakota Sioux, meaning determined endurance, not the other way around. Before pain ever entered the body, comfort had to leave it. The ritual began with fasting and thirst, sometimes for days. No food. No water.
No distraction.
Hunger hollowed the body. Thirst sharpened the senses. Weakness surfaced early so that fear would not surprise the mind later. This wasn't about physical depletion alone. It was about stripping away the constant noise that usually tells the body it is in danger. As the body quieted, attention turned inward. Breath slowed. Thoughts became deliberate. By the time the ceremony reached its peak, the nervous system had already been reshaped. Then came the circle. The drumming. The chanting. The movement of bodies around a central pole that symbolized connection between earth and sky. Rhythm wasn't decoration. It was control. The drum gave the body something steady to lock onto when sensation intensified. Sound anchored awareness. The crowd wasn't there to cheer or distract. They were witnesses. Pain changes when it is witnessed. It becomes meaning instead of chaos. Every eye reinforced the same message: endure with control, not resistance. And then came the moment modern viewers fixate on: the piercing. But focusing on the flesh misses the point. By the time it happened, the mind was already elsewhere. Pain arrived, but it did not dominate. Breath, rhythm, and belief shaped how it was processed. The body sent signals. The mind chose how loudly to listen. This is where control was tested, not bravery. Panic would have ended the ritual instantly. Calm allowed it to continue. Pain became a current you rode instead of a force that drowned you. As the ritual continued, exhaustion and sensation merged into something else entirely. Time blurred. The boundary between body and thought softened. This wasn't endurance through clenched teeth, it was endurance through surrender to focus. When the breaking point finally arrived, it wasn't explosive. It was quiet. And when the young man emerged from the ceremony, he didn't leave having proven he could tolerate pain. He left knowing something far more dangerous. Pain does not decide when you stop. That decision belongs to the mind. And what happened next, what that knowledge did to a man, is where the sun dance truly revealed its power. What happened inside the mind during the peak of the sun dance is the part that unsettles modern observers the most, because it looks impossible if you only understand pain as a physical signal. By the time the ritual reached its most intense phase, the body was exhausted, dehydrated, and overwhelmed with sensation. Exactly the conditions where panic should have taken over. But instead of collapse, something else emerged. The young men did not escape their bodies. They stopped being ruled by them. This was not unconsciousness. It was heightened awareness without fear. And that state was not accidental. Modern psychology would later call this dissociation, but that word makes it sound passive, like something that happens to you. What the sun dance cultivated was active control. The mind narrowed its attention so tightly that pain lost its dominance. Instead of spreading through the body as chaos, sensation became localized, observed, almost distant. Breath stayed steady. Rhythm anchored awareness. Meaning overrode instinct. The body screamed for escape, but the mind no longer interpreted those signals as commands. This is the difference between suffering and sensation. One overwhelms. The other informs. This is where belief became physiology. Pain does not exist in isolation. It is filtered through expectation, fear, and meaning. The sun dance stripped away fear first. Pain was expected, welcomed even, because it was proof the ritual was working. That single shift changed how the nervous system responded. When pain arrived without panic, the body did not escalate it. Heart rate stayed controlled. Breath stayed deep. Endorphins were released not as emergency relief, but as reinforcement. The body learned that remaining calm under extreme sensation was possible, and repeatable. Witnesses played a critical role here. Pain experienced alone invites collapse. Pain experienced in front of others invites meaning. Every eye watching reinforced discipline. Every drumbeat reminded the body that it was not lost or abandoned. The young men were not performing for applause. They were anchoring themselves inside a shared expectation of control. This is why the ritual could not be replicated privately. Pain control was learned in relationship, not isolation. When the breaking point finally came, it did not arrive as collapse. It arrived as clarity. The moment the mind realized it could stay present without obeying pain, something permanent shifted. Fear lost authority. The young man did not leave the sun dance with a memory of suffering. He left with a reference point his nervous system would never forget. Stress, injury, chaos, none of them would ever feel as absolute again. This is why the sun dance was never just a ceremony. It was training. And what that training produced is exactly what frightened the outside world, men who could feel pain without being ruled by it. By the time outsiders began witnessing the sun dance, they assumed they were seeing superstition or brutality because they had no framework for what was actually happening. What they were observing was a sophisticated understanding of the nervous system centuries before science had language for it. The men of the Lakota Sioux were not ignoring pain. They were reorganizing how the mind processed it. And that distinction changes everything. Pain is not just a signal from the body. It is an interpretation layered with fear, anticipation, and meaning. Change the meaning, and the signal changes with it. Modern neuroscience would eventually discover that focused attention can dampen pain signals before they reach full awareness. The sun dance used rhythm, breath, and expectation to do exactly that. Drumming created predictable sensory input, giving the brain something stable to lock onto. Chanting regulated breathing, slowing heart rate and preventing panic. Fasting and thirst reduced sensory noise, making the mind sharper instead of scattered. None of this was accidental. Each element worked together to keep the nervous system from escalating pain into suffering. What looked extreme from the outside was, internally, deeply controlled. This is where modern men misunderstand endurance. Most people try to push through pain by tensing against it. That actually amplifies suffering. The sun dance taught the opposite response. Relaxation inside intensity. Focus instead of resistance. When the body senses panic, it increases pain to force escape. When the body senses calm, it stops escalating. The ritual trained the nervous system to associate extreme sensation with control rather than danger. That association is powerful. It doesn't fade after the ceremony ends. It becomes a permanent reference point. What made this training so effective was that it was embodied, not intellectual. No one explained theories. No one lectured about mindset. The body learned directly through experience. Once a man felt pain peak and realized he could remain present without breaking, his relationship to fear changed permanently. Everyday stress could no longer hijack him the same way. Injury lost some of its authority. Chaos became navigable. This is why elders valued the ritual so deeply. It produced men who were reliable under pressure, not because they were fearless, but because fear no longer controlled their reactions. From the outside, colonizers saw pain and assumed cruelty. Missionaries saw flesh and assumed barbarism. What they failed to see was discipline encoded into ritual form. The sun dance wasn't defiance of pain. It was mastery of it. And once you understand that, the question stops being how could they endure this, and becomes something far more uncomfortable for the modern world. Why have we built a culture that never teaches this skill at all? Because what the sun dance produced wasn't mysticism. It was men whose minds stayed intact when pressure arrived. And that is exactly what the next act reveals frightened the outside world the most. When a young man emerged from the sun dance, nothing about him looked dramatic at first glance. There was no victory pose, no public celebration, no speech announcing transformation. And that was the point. What had changed was internal, and therefore permanent. The real outcome of the ritual was not endurance in a single moment, but reliability across a lifetime. The man who walked away had crossed a threshold most people never approach. He had discovered that pain could peak without destroying him. Once that truth was learned in the body, it could never be unlearned. This is why elders paid close attention to who completed the sun dance and how they carried themselves afterward. The ritual was not about proving toughness. It was about revealing character under irreversible pressure. A man who could remain composed when every instinct demanded escape was a man who could be trusted when fear entered a hunt, a conflict, or a crisis. The tribe did not need declarations of strength. They needed evidence. The sun dance provided that evidence without words. Endurance under pain translated directly into steadiness under chaos. What the young men gained was not numbness. They still felt pain. They still experienced fear. The difference was that these sensations no longer dictated their behavior. Pain lost its authority to command immediate reaction. Fear lost its power to collapse decision-making. This internal shift followed them everywhere. In moments of injury, they did not panic. In moments of exhaustion, they did not spiral. The nervous system remembered the reference point: I have been here before, and I remained intact. That memory alone was enough to prevent breakdown. This is where the sun dance separated itself from spectacle. The goal was never the ritual itself. The goal was what followed. Men who had completed it carried themselves differently in everyday life. Their movements were deliberate. Their reactions measured. When conflict arose, they did not rush toward aggression or avoidance. They stayed present. The body had learned that intensity did not require loss of control. That lesson extended beyond pain into every other stressor life could deliver. For the Lakota Sioux, this was the real measure of manhood. Not dominance, not bravado, but composure when consequences were real. The sun dance produced men who did not need constant validation, because they had tested themselves in a way that left no ambiguity. They knew exactly where their breaking point was, and that knowledge made them difficult to destabilize. Once pain had been faced directly and survived with control, lesser pressures lost their power to intimidate. What followed was not pride, but responsibility. A man who had mastered himself was expected to serve the community with that mastery. Control was not personal achievement alone. It was a social asset. And that, more than the ritual itself, explains why the outside world reacted with fear. Because a culture that produces men who cannot be easily broken is a culture that cannot be easily controlled. The moment the outside world truly noticed the sun dance, fear followed close behind. Not fear of pain itself, but fear of what that pain produced. Colonial authorities and missionaries did not see a ritual. They saw a system that forged men who could not be easily intimidated, rushed, or psychologically dominated. To them, this was not spiritual practice. It was a threat. A man who does not panic under suffering is a man who does not submit easily to control, coercion, or shame. That kind of internal stability undermines power structures built on fear. Missionaries focused on the flesh because it allowed them to dismiss the mind. By labeling the ritual as barbaric, they avoided confronting its psychological sophistication. Pain, in their worldview, was something to be avoided or redeemed later, not something to be faced directly and mastered. The idea that pain could be used intentionally to strengthen discipline conflicted with systems built on guilt, obedience, and delayed reward. What could not be reframed as sinful had to be outlawed. So the ritual was stripped of context and reduced to spectacle. Government authorities followed with laws. Bans were enacted. Ceremonies were driven underground. Not because they caused harm, but because they produced resilience outside state control. A population trained to remain composed under extreme stress is difficult to manipulate. Fear-based compliance weakens when men have already faced suffering voluntarily and survived with dignity. The sun dance was not just a cultural expression. It was psychological infrastructure. Removing it was a strategic move, whether acknowledged or not. This suppression carried a deeper cost that few recognized at the time. By dismantling initiation rites, entire generations were left without structured transitions into manhood. Pain was no longer framed, contextualized, or integrated. It became something random and frightening instead of meaningful and instructive. When discomfort arrives without preparation, it destabilizes. When it arrives with training, it strengthens. The sun dance provided that training. Its removal created a vacuum, one filled not with peace, but with anxiety, confusion, and untested identity. This is why the reaction was so intense. The ritual did not just belong to the past. It exposed a weakness in modern systems that still exists today. Cultures that never teach men how to meet pain deliberately must manage the fallout later, through control, distraction, or medication. The sun dance offered another path entirely. And that path, once understood, became impossible to ignore, or to comfortably allow. What the outside world feared was not suffering. It was sovereignty over the self. And once that fear took root, the ritual's fate was sealed, even as its lesson refused to disappear. When structured initiation disappeared, it didn't leave behind freedom, it left confusion. Without rituals that taught men how to meet pain deliberately, modern culture replaced initiation with motivation. Quotes, hacks, distractions, comfort framed as progress. But motivation fades the moment discomfort arrives. Initiation does not. The difference is simple and brutal. One prepares you before pain shows up, the other tries to rescue you after it already controls you. For the Lakota Sioux, pain was not something to be avoided or postponed. It was something to be integrated. The sun dance gave pain a container, a purpose, and a boundary. Modern men are rarely given any of those. Pain now arrives randomly, through stress, heartbreak, injury, failure, without meaning or preparation. And when pain is unframed, it becomes overwhelming. Anxiety fills the gap where initiation once lived. Not because men are weaker, but because they were never taught how to meet intensity without losing themselves. This is why anxiety dominates where initiation is gone. Anxiety is not fear of pain, it is fear of not knowing how you will respond when pain arrives. The sun dance removed that uncertainty. A man who had already faced his breaking point no longer feared discovering it by accident. Modern culture, by contrast, delays confrontation for as long as possible. Comfort becomes the default strategy. But comfort never teaches control. It only postpones the test. What has been lost is not toughness, but calibration. Initiation calibrated the nervous system. It taught the body what too much actually feels like, and that survival is still possible on the other side. Without that calibration, every challenge feels existential. Small stressors trigger large reactions. Pain feels infinite because it has never been bounded. The sun dance taught limits by crossing them deliberately, once under control, instead of discovering them randomly under chaos. This is the uncomfortable question the modern world avoids. If men are never taught how to meet pain intentionally, who teaches them instead? Fear, crisis, trauma, medication, distraction. None of those are initiation, they are consequences. The sun dance did not remove pain from life. It removed pain's ability to ambush. And that is why its absence is still felt today, even in cultures far removed from its origins. Because when initiation disappears, pain does not. It just arrives unannounced. Because when initiation disappears, pain does not. It just arrives unannounced. This is why the ritual left such a lasting imprint. A man who had learned that pain could be experienced without surrendering agency carried that knowledge everywhere. Injury, stress, fear, loss, none of them vanished. But they no longer dictated reaction. The body could send signals without hijacking behavior. That separation is rare. It cannot be taught through explanation alone. It must be felt. And once felt, it becomes a permanent reference point. The nervous system remembers that survival does not require panic. This was the quiet knowledge held by the Lakota Sioux long before modern language tried to describe it. Pain does not weaken men by default. What weakens men is pain that arrives without preparation, without meaning, and without a framework for response. Unprepared pain feels endless. It feels personal. It feels like failure. Prepared pain, by contrast, becomes finite. It has edges. It has context. And because it has context, it can be endured without collapsing identity. Modern culture still teaches men many things, but it rarely teaches this. Instead of initiation, it offers avoidance. Instead of calibration, it offers comfort. Instead of meaning, it offers distraction. Pain still arrives, it always will, but now it does so without warning and without guidance. When that happens, men are left negotiating intensity alone, improvising responses in moments where clarity matters most. The sun dance did not eliminate pain from life. It eliminated surprise. And that is the lesson that still burns beneath the surface. Not that pain should be sought, glorified, or romanticized, but that pain will arrive regardless, and preparation determines whether it sharpens or shatters. The sun dance answered that question directly, without abstraction. It taught men how to meet intensity before intensity decided for them. If pain was the teacher, what is teaching men now?